A warm welcome. You're tuned into Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi. These are the top stories on the continent. Kenyan police shot dead 2 protesters and injure a third after they allegedly stormed a police station in the opposition stronghold of Bondo. Well, protests continue despite a government ban in 3 major cities. Our correspondent Julia Steers has the latest in Nairobi. With dozens dead from an outbreak of the plague in Madagascar, the Red Cross is deploying its first ever plague treatment centre to the island nation. And women are pulling the strings. Literally, female puppet makers challenge traditional thinking which suggests that only men are up to the job. But first to our top story. Kenyan police say they shot dead 2 protesters and wounded a third this Friday after they allegedly stormed a police station in the opposition stronghold of Bondo. Well, police, meanwhile, used tear gas on protesters in the capital, Nairobi, as they enforced a ban on opposition rallies in 3 major cities. Well, tensions remain high ahead of a repeat presidential election scheduled for October the 26th. Demonstrators have vowed to continue protesting despite a ban. The opposition leader, Raila Odinga, had this to say earlier.
It is not me urging my supporters. The people of Kenya who are themselves exercising their democratic right.
Well, for more on this story, France 24's Julia Steers is standing by in Nairobi. Julia, what's the latest we have regarding today's protest? Are they still going on now?
Well, they wrapped up here this evening, but as you said, protesters clashed with police in several large cities across Kenya, particularly in western cities, which are typically considered to be Odinga and opposition strongholds. They faced off with police in Kisumu and also here in Nairobi, where there was tear gas and live rounds fired. We were hearing the same from these western cities, including in Bondo, where there were 3 shot, at least 2 dead. And this is a continuation of some of the clashes with police that we saw after the August 8th elections. We had opposition protesters out in the streets there, and they were met with a very strong showing of force by Kenyan police. Of course, the police in these incidents today say they were responding to looting and criminal activity. The opposition themselves have rejected these claims outright. They say their supporters are only peacefully protesting and that any charges of looting or violence are unfounded.
So, Julia, I guess the question is what next for Kenya ahead of this repeat election scheduled for the 26th of October?
Exactly. There's a lot of things still in play, a lot of things still being sorted out at this moment. But for now, the Electoral Commission has decided that they will certainly go ahead with these elections in just 11 days. They ruled yesterday to include other candidates besides just Odinga and President Kenyatta. Now, as you know, Odinga pulled out of the race just 2 days ago. He says he will not stand in this election. He's withdrawn from the race because he says the Electoral Commission has not gone far enough in implementing reforms. And that is, of course, why his supporters are out in the streets protesting. They say that he will not stand in the election, that they will continue to protest until the Electoral Commission agrees to delay the election even further in order to allow for these reforms to take place. But for now, all that we do know is that the Electoral Commission says they are doing their best to be able to hold a free and fair and credible election on October 26th.
OK, Julia Steers keeping us up to date from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you. In other news, South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal has ruled that President Jacob Zuma must face prosecution on nearly 800 corruption charges relating to a 1990s arms deal. Well, it's agreed with a 2016 lower court ruling that the charges could be reinstated. Zuma's office has called the news disappointing. The opposition Democratic Alliance has fought since 2009 to reactivate the charges. Party leader Mmusi Maimane had this to say.
So today's win is a win for justice. It's a win for the rule of law in this country and ultimately for the people of South Africa. Jacob Zuma will not defeat the ends of justice. We certainly will not watch that happen.
Next, Cameroon has launched an inquiry into recent deadly violence linked to a symbolic declaration of independence in the country's English-speaking region. Authorities say 10 people died when protests turned violent ahead of the declaration on October the 1st. Amnesty International, though, says security officers in fact unlawfully shot dead 20 people. Now, they also denounce a mass arbitrary arrest, saying that some 500 people are still being detained in the Anglophone region's overcrowded prisons. In Liberia, vote counting is still underway following presidential elections on Tuesday. Now, with 33% of the votes counted, preliminary results suggest that the former international football star George Weah maintains an early lead. But with 20 candidates, observers fully expect a runoff election. The National Election Commission has warned candidate supporters against declaring victory until the final results are announced. That must be done by October the 25th. With at least 57 dead from an outbreak of the plague in Madagascar, the Red Cross is to deploy its first ever plague treatment centre to the island nation. Well, the World Health Organization says over 500 cases have been reported so far, with one in the Seychelles where schools have since been closed. Red Cross officials say the situation is particularly worrying. Dr. Julie Hall is Director of Health and Care at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. She joins us on the line from Switzerland. Hello to you, Dr. Hall. Talk us through why this form of the plague is particularly worrying and why we're seeing such a rise in it.
Yes, Madagascar is endemic for plague, so they often do have plague outbreaks, but the type of plague that they suffer from each year is what's called bubonic plague, and that is an infection that is spread from rat fleas to humans, with very little spread between humans. Unfortunately, this year, what we're seeing is a big outbreak of what's called pneumonic plague. That means it's plague that is spread from one human to another through coughing and sneezing. It is more infectious than the normal type of plague that's seen in Madagascar and can spread quite quickly, which is why we have seen a doubling in the number of cases over the last week and why it is so important that we respond very rapidly to this plague outbreak. The good thing about this plague outbreak is that plague is treatable with antibiotics, but only if people receive those antibiotics very quickly after developing symptoms. It's also preventable if someone who's had close contact with someone who has plague by those people receiving antibiotics very quickly as well.
I mean, Dr. Hall, you spoke about a response there. This will be the first ever plague treatment centre in Madagascar. What kind of facilities is it going to have?
Yeah, so we're looking at a very flexible response, being able to provide support to at least 50 inpatients at any one point in time, deploying the equipment to keep those patients safe, prevent further infection and make sure they get that treatment as quickly as possible. That makes a difference to saving their lives, and it also means that they cannot then spread it onto other people. So for both of those reasons, it's very important to make sure we've got the right capacity in country, and hence we're deploying equipment and people and staff to support the local health system to ensure that anyone with plague can be treated very quickly. In addition to the treatment centre, we have over 1,000 volunteers going door to door to get the right messages out, to make sure that people know if you've had contact with someone with plague, get the antibiotics as quickly as possible. This is Dr. the best way that we can stop this outbreak.
OK, Dr. Hall, that's where we have to leave it for now, I'm afraid. Thanks very much for speaking to France 24 this evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
In West Africa, puppets or marionette dolls are regarded as mystical and sacred objects that are typically taboo for women to touch. But female puppet makers from Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast and Niger have come to Mali to fight back against that tradition. They want to prove you don't have to be a man to do the job. Anthony Foucha reports.
The beauty of puppets like these is in the fine detail and the balance between careful craftsmanship and pure extravagance.
No, goodness, you're beautiful, stunning. Do you know that you're stunning?
Moi, personnellement, quand je regarde votre marionnette, j'ai un peu peur quand même.
It scares me too, but you just have to take it one step at a time. You can't leave out a stage. But eventually, at the end, this will be a beautiful doll.
In West Africa, marionette dolls like these are sacred objects, Making them is a job normally reserved for men. But 12 women from across the region have come together in Mali to show this can be a profession that's open to all. The only limit, your imagination.
They're like humans really, but it varies. I find some of the dolls really original. One new puppet maker asked me what I thought about their doll, and I told her it was so original there was nothing I could have changed. She was inspired by her own feelings, and that's what we try and get all the participants to do.
Kamara Kadidiatu is a doll maker from the Ivory Coast. For the past 2 years, her all-female theatre company have used dolls in educational productions.
If you want to talk about HIV, for example, with girls who are 12 or 13, then we do little shows with the dolls, so they can really understand what we're trying to say to them.
The group plans to stage pop-up puppet shows in places like markets as well. But those dolls will be life-size.
Your Eye on Africa team will be back in about 45 minutes' time. Up next, there's more international headlines. Mariam Saab is here.
I find the team here at France 24 humble, hard-working and with their feet on the ground.
C'est une des seules chaînes d'infos où on nous laisse jouer en plateau avec des Legos, avec des robots, avec tout un tas d'objets.
We take a return ticket to revisit some of the key people and places of the last 50 years of world television news.
على فرانس 24 يمكننا أن نحاور أصحاب القرار من العالم في كل الميادين ولدينا المساحة لكشف ثنايا مسيرتهم.
Les femmes, elles sont souvent victimes de l'actualité internationale, mais ce sont aussi des actrices majeures de la géopolitique. Et d'ailleurs, on en parle dans France 24.